Hey aficionados, Sean and Miguel here, and we just got back from seeing Shin Godzilla, which is the new Japanese Godzilla. As a big Godzilla fan, I really wanted to talk about this movie, so we'll just go through a little bit of our opinions on it, our first impressions, and then we'll let you know what we think of it and how it compares to the 2014 American Godzilla as well as the original.
So right off the bat, I think one of the first things to talk about with this movie is obviously how the monster sort of takes shape over the course of the film. And to me, I thought that was one of the film's strongest points. It was really interesting to see the evolution of Godzilla from this weird, crawly creature coming out of the sea to the traditional form of Godzilla that we're pretty much used to, and also seeing the powers emerge. I think that's always the most interesting thing about these kinds of monster movies, is seeing exactly what the monster is capable of. And this film definitely doesn't disappoint. It's really interesting to see where Godzilla goes, and I was kind of, I was questioning it all the way up until you see its final form. Yeah. And even the end of the film, which is a bit of a cliffhanger, leaves it open to how Godzilla will change in the future. I don't want to give away too many spoilers in case you haven't seen it. I mean, the movie's just come out in theaters, but it does leave room open for more experimentation with Godzilla in the future, which is really cool.
Yeah, it feels like a new take on the classic form of Godzilla. It feels like it's rooted in the classic Godzilla, but there's some new additions to the character that don't take away from the original character. I don't want to give away too much, but there's some differences to the character. You talked about the evolution of it. It starts off, honestly, when I first saw the first version, I wasn't even sure if it actually was Godzilla, because I hadn't looked up anything about the movie at all. Mm-hmm. So it kind of has the same characteristics of a Godzilla, but it's not 100% like Godzilla. It kind of looks like this weird sort of flopping fish type thing.
Just for reference, I do have a model here. This is kind of what the original version of Godzilla looks like in this movie when it starts out. We don't want to use any pictures because that would be spoilers, but this is kind of what it looks like. It's flopping around and it's rubbing its head.
And it has these sort of bulging gills.
Yeah, it has bulging gills around this area, and there's blood spilling. It's really gross, and it has these big fish eyes.
Mm-hmm. Very tadpole-esque. And then, of course, once it evolves into the final form, it looks a lot like the original Godzilla, but there's some differences to that as well. It's a lot like the nuclear meltdown version of Godzilla from Godzilla vs. Destroyer. But yeah, it's very cool, and it looks good in certain scenes, because I believe they did use a suit for some of the scenes that it was shot. But also, this kind of gets into the next part of the movie that's probably my least favorite part, and that's the CGI. There's particular scenes where it really stands out. It looks like a video game, something like that. Not well done.
Yeah, it doesn't mesh with its environment, You can tell that it's just a CG character placed in a real shot. And I think in the early form of Godzilla, it's the least convincing. Although it looks very interesting the way it's animated. Like I said, it's kind of gross and flopping around all over the place, but it was still, that suspension of disbelief wasn't there.
And even certain things that shouldn't even be that difficult to animate looked fake at times. There's this part where they clearly use CGI to create bullet trains, and it looks like something from a classic video game from the 90s.
It kind of shocked me, because a train, you think, is so ordinary, run-of-the-mill. It would be so easy to just do that with editing effects. You wouldn't even need CGI, but instead they use CG and it just looks totally fake.
Mm-hmm. So overall, the visual effects I found disappointing and probably the most disappointing part of the film, because really the rest of the film is very good. So the part of the film that I was very happy about that kind of stayed true to the original Godzilla was the whole political element of it. The nuclear weapon element of Godzilla rang true to the original, and just the fear, and Godzilla is a destructive force again. That was my biggest disappointment with the 2014 American Godzilla. Godzilla ended up being a hero at the end of the day, and that's just not what Godzilla is. And that's not what I want to see in my Godzilla films. I want Godzilla to be that destructive force, and they brought him back as a destructive force.
Absolutely. I mean, the film has scenes that are absolutely terrifying. When you see the destruction wrought by this creature, it's awe-inspiring, really. It's amazing how they took this creature, this concept of this giant creature, and brought it down to the real world and made it like what would actually happen, and that's what the film is based on. The very nitty-gritty aspects of executive decision-making and politicking that would occur during this sort of monster eruption. It almost mimics a natural disaster movie, and that feels appropriate for Godzilla. Like you said, Godzilla's, although after the original there were more of like the monster battle kind of movies, and that's what the 2014 American version was kind of drawing on, was like the Godzilla versus other monsters kind of thing. But this is going back to that original movie where Godzilla is just this mindlessly destructive force that no one knows how to stop, and that they are powerless, absolutely powerless to get rid of. And they're just poring over all this research, trying to figure out any way to stop it. And even, again, like you said, the political aspects of it, this one explicitly references the atomic bombings of Japan in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the first film that's where it came from. The legacy of thermonuclear war on Japanese soil and the fear of that happening again is what spawned the original idea for Godzilla. So for this film to be commenting on that explicitly shows that the creators see, they actually understand what Godzilla's about.
Yeah, it feels like a natural disaster film. And even some of the scenes are shot that way. You get these really low angles of people running from Godzilla and shot up at Godzilla, and he's just this massive thing mowing through the city. And you get these far out shots that just show the line of destruction that he had just gone through. It shows people dying. It shows a family dying at one point. The destruction feels real. It has weight to it. And you get to see all the behind the scenes stuff too, and it's frantic, chaotic. They don't know how to deal with this situation. It even throws you right into it right in the beginning. You're like, haven't even gotten your bearings yet, and the movie's throwing you right into this disaster situation. And the cuts are one of the things that I think emphasize that the most. There's a lot of cutting, a lot of jump cutting. Goes from like one meeting to the next, to the next, to the next. Constantly going to different meetings, trying to figure out how to deal with this, trying to figure out what it is. And it's just really frantic. And another one of the most interesting parts, at least for me in the movie, was the political conflict between the United States and Japan. And you can feel the tension in this movie. And you could tell that maybe the people behind the scenes sort of have these feelings themselves, because it comes through in the movie.
Yeah, it almost feels like there is sort of a political agenda behind it. It definitely has sort of its own take on Japan's current geopolitical position in the world. And it is explicitly commenting on Japan's lack of a standing army and on its sort of subservient role to U.S. interests in a way that sort of puts forward the idea that Japan should be a more independent nation, which is really interesting, especially considering modern political developments in Japan, which is increasingly going towards nationalism and bringing up those ideas of maybe having its own standing military.
And I just found it very convincing as well, because in my mind, like, I have no doubt that if something like this were to happen in Japan, America would just be like, this is what we're going to do, and you're going to like it, and you're going to have to deal with it no matter what. So that part was very believable, and I found it really interesting.
You'll probably notice that we haven't spoken much about characters specifically, And I think that's one of the problems. And this may be just because it's a foreign film and you have to rely on you're reading the subtitles all the time and there's all those jump cuts and it's so fast. Every time it changes location or goes to a new person, it has their name up at the top and it says like, the Deputy Prime Minister of Japan. And so you'll have two subtitles. The subtitles at the top that say their title or the title of the place you're in, and then the subtitles at the bottom, that's the dialogue that the characters are speaking. So it's almost impossible to keep track of like, who the hell is this guy and who's talking? And so I ended up just completely ignoring the second set of subtitles that was telling you the names of the characters and the names of the locations. So I don't really remember any of the characters' names. And really, although some of the characters did have like interesting personality quirks or sort of stand out, for the most part, they all kind of just blur together into these like confused government functionaries. And I guess like that's maybe one of the points of the movie is that like the government's scrambling around like ants trying to figure out how things are going, but it also leaves you a little bit without a good anchor to really make yourself feel close to and sympathize with during the course of this. I think the one standout character is the guy who's heading up the special Bureau of Disaster Defense. And he's obviously the character who the film focuses on the most. But still, there isn't that much. We don't know anything about his family life. We don't really know anything about his ambitions outside of government. And he just seems to be kind of like a driven, principled guy who has like kind of weird quirks where he's always going into outbursts in the course of meetings. Yeah,
there isn't many character arcs going on in this movie. They're all just kind of government officials and kind of just trying to do their jobs to the best of their ability. I do second the subtitle thing. The two subtitles, I also completely ignored the top subtitle. I never knew where they were. I just was kind of trying to keep up with the dialogue because it was very fast dialogue. Like one after the other, line after the other, especially in the scenes when they're in meetings together. It's just like this person says this thing, this person says this thing, this person says this thing. There's no like hesitation or pauses in between anything.
Meanwhile, all their names are coming up on top of the screen and you can't keep up with it.
Yeah, and also because it was in Japanese and because you're trying to read the subtitles too to keep up, I think it's hard to pick up any nuances in their performance and line delivery.
Also, that sort of impacts the humor in this movie, which the movie does have comic relief, which is for the most part pretty cool, but I don't know if I'm really criticizing the movie for this, but just kind of cautioning American audiences. A lot of it feels very like Japanese, and maybe like most of the humor just went totally over our heads, because again, a lot of it I think has to do with line delivery and with the sort of like the weird politicking between the characters and the way they're showing deference, and none of them really want to say exactly what's on their mind to the prime minister and all this other sort of stuff. So it's hard to keep track of their physical performances and their line delivery and, you know, the accents that they're using, and then to really catch all the jokes and all the humor and all of the little subtle points of characterization that maybe a native Japanese person would probably understand a lot easier.
But there definitely was some humor in there, and at first I was like, I can't really tell if this is supposed to be funny or if it's just coming off funny to us as an American audience, but no. After a little while, it becomes very clear that they're definitely trying to make fun of the whole politicking part of it, the red tape part of government, the million meetings that they have to go to end up not coming up with any real decisions at all. So that was another interesting part of the film, and it balances out the more dark, scary parts of this event that's happened. One last thing that I just want to touch on briefly, it's related to the ending of the film. So I don't think it's going to be too big of a spoiler. I just want to say that combining the special effects and how they were a little bit fake and video game-esque with the way the movie ended, the plan that they put into action to try to defeat Godzilla, it's very stepwise. And to me, I couldn't help but think of the way that you have to go about trying to defeat a boss in a video game. It felt very like, you have to do this, then you have to do this, and then you have to do this to defeat the video game boss. And it kind of took me out of it a little bit. Like, it didn't feel it felt like it lost some of the weight.
Yeah,
it lost some of the momentum.
Yeah, like the stakes weren't really as high as they were in the lead up to it, and like you said, the momentum of like what's gonna happen kind of goes away a little bit.
Mm-hmm. All right, so for our final thoughts on Shin Godzilla, we are going to give this one 3.75 alligator fish creatures out of 5.
That is right, folks. 3.75 alligator fish googly-eyed monsters out of 5. The movie was good. It's definitely solid, especially if you're a fan of the original Godzilla film. It captures the spirit of the original, it captures the themes of the original, and it adds a little bit of modern Japanese geopolitical posturing in there for good measure. So it's pretty cool, pretty unique all around.
I have to say that this might be my second favorite Godzilla movie, next to the original one. I was very happy with what they did with this, especially comparing it to the original. I think it holds up in terms of the same type of themes, the weight that the film carries. I do wish the effects were a little bit better, and I found that really disappointing, and that pulled the rating down a lot for me, I think. But comparing it to something like the 2014 American version, miles above it. And I was very happy with how they handled Godzilla, how they handled the content. A great movie if you're a Godzilla fan. You have to check this one out. Like I said, this is probably the second best Godzilla movie next to the original. They did it justice.
Absolutely. So if you guys have seen it, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Put them in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe. And remember, whether it's liqueurs, movies, games, or beer,
if you're looking for reviews and alligator fish monsters, you can find them right here.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Dun, 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 dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun.
Dun, 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 dun.
Dun, dun, dun,
Dun,
dun, dun.